The smell of burnt plastic lingers in the air, sharp and acrid, like the aftertaste of betrayal. I stand in the kitchen, barefoot on the cool polished concrete, staring at the remnants of my passport smoldering in the sink. The edges have curled inwards, molten and black, while the center still carries the faint ghost of my face, blurred, distorted. I don't remember the exact moment I stopped feeling shocked by Grant's behavior. Maybe it was when he began addressing me like a secretary instead of a wife. Or maybe it was this very morning when I caught him in the act of destroying my freedom and said nothing. "Don't look so dramatic," he says from behind me, his voice casual and sticky with condescension. He's perched on one of the bar stools, lazily sipping his matcha smoothie, the one he insists I blend for him every morning at precisely 7:15. His eyes are locked onto his phone, thumb scrolling rapidly, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You don't need it. Just stay home with the kids. That's what real wives do." He doesn't even glance at me as he speaks, doesn't register the slight tremor in my hand or the steel hardening in my spine. I stare at him, not for attention, but to etch this moment into memory. The subtle way his lips curl as he delivers the insult. The soft green hue of his overpriced health drink. The flash of Rena's name in a text that lights up his screen, quickly swiped away. Isla Terra. That's where he's going. A dreamy Mediterranean island with warm breezes, glassy water, and the woman he thinks I don't know about. Rena. His so-called marketing consultant, with lips always glossed and voice always hushed when I enter a room. I knew months ago, but I waited. Patience isn't submission, it's strategy. The kettle whistles behind me, forgotten on the stove. I shut it off silently. He still doesn't look up. He's planning his little escape, believing I'm tethered here, wrapped in the bindings of domesticity and dependence. He thinks I'll cry quietly while he sips wine on a balcony somewhere, whispering empty promises to Rena under a foreign moon. He doesn't know me at all. "Did you really think I wouldn't need my passport?" I ask softly, not because I expect an answer, but because I want to hear how he'll lie. He shrugs, tapping away on his screen. "I figured you'd get over it. Besides, this trip is work. You hate networking, and someone has to stay with the kids." "Of course. Always work. Always my fault." I turn my back to him, pick up the broken passport, and toss it into the trash with a soft clatter. The bin lid closes with finality. The walls of this kitchen are white, sharp lines and minimalist surfaces, his taste, not mine. It feels sterile. Hollow. Like our marriage. He finishes his smoothie with an obnoxious slurp. "Hey, can you remind Ellie about her reading app? Her teacher said she's falling behind again." Like I'm the nanny, not the woman who birthed her. I nod. Not because I agree, but because I'm done fighting battles that don't matter anymore. "You're quiet," he says, a bit more alert now. "Don't go all cold on me." "I told you, it's just a few days." I offer him a smile. Just a slight curve of the lips. The kind you give when you know something the other person doesn't. The kind that tastes like justice waiting to ripen. He thinks he's in control. That I'm just a housewife, background noise to his curated life. He doesn't know what's coming. That his trip will be the last thing he ever plans without consequence. I glance at the clock. 12 hours until his flight. 24 until mine. Let him enjoy his smoothie. Let him bask in his false power. This house, this routine, this version of me, none of it will exist by the time he comes back. I wipe the counter once, slowly, methodically. My fingers linger over the edge where I once braced myself after he told me I'd lost my edge. That I was too soft to lead. I was never soft. I was just waiting for the perfect time to strike. And now, it's here. The world always underestimated women who knew how to wait. Grant believed patience meant passivity. That silence meant surrender. That I had somehow fallen asleep inside the role he carved for me, mother, maid, a shadow stitched to his spotlight. But the truth? The truth was I'd never stopped building. I just learned how to do it where he wasn't looking. I remember the look on the attorney's face when we finalized the deal, the handshake, the discreet nod, the number that shimmered on the final document like a sunrise after years of darkness. $2.1 billion. Not million. Billion. all for the biotech platform I'd been developing for 6 years. It started as research on cognitive patterning after my mother passed, then evolved into an AI neural mapping interface used now in early detection tech and adaptive prosthetics. I built it between soccer practices, during midnight nursing sessions, in the quiet hours when Grant assumed I was sleeping beside him. He never asked questions. Never noticed the late-night conference calls or the startup boxes delivered to a P.O. box 2 towns over. Not once did he think to ask where I disappeared during my supposed Pilates sessions. That's how little he saw me. That's how invisible I'd become in his eyes. When the deal closed, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile, not then. I just sat in the leather chair across from Mira, my attorney, feeling the weight of a secret so massive it almost hurt to hold. I signed the final page, capped the pen, and quietly folded back into my life. The kids were watching a movie when I got home. Grant was on the phone in his office, pacing, frustrated, probably trying to salvage another overambitious pitch. I made dinner, kissed Ellie's forehead, listened to Leo tell me about his spelling test. I held it all in, because this wasn't the moment for fireworks. This was the moment to wait. He still thinks I'm just a housewife. That's the funniest part. He thinks I clip coupons, text PDA moms, and scroll parenting blogs while he carves out his legacy. He has no idea that I met with 10 venture capitalists before breakfast last month, or that I've sat across from CEOs who sweat when I speak. He's heading to Isla with Rena tomorrow, and he thinks he's the one winning. He thinks burning my passport was a checkmate move, locking me in place while he sails into paradise. But he doesn't know I already have another passport, one he never even saw. He never looked inside my fireproof lockbox. Never noticed the second identity I secured 2 years ago while building the platform's overseas branch. My name is the same, but the citizenship is dual. Grant doesn't know the rules of this game, he just thinks he's already won it. I wanted to tell him once. I almost did. The day the term sheet hit my inbox, I came into the kitchen holding the printed copy. I paused behind him as he stood at the stove, trying to flambe some salmon for a client dinner. He didn't even turn around. Just muttered something about needing more lemon. I folded the paper and slid it into my handbag. The triumph didn't come with champagne or applause. It came with quiet knowing, with power tucked behind my ribs like a secret sword. He never suspected a thing. And now? Now I'm holding all the cards. I built PRYSM from nothing but grief, grit, and clarity. And now it's under acquisition by a global firm, one I negotiated equity shares in, along with full creative control. I own the patents, the architecture, the future. He still thinks the biggest moment of his year is a getaway with his mistress. I walk into my studio, formerly a guest room, now a disguised command center. Screens light up, encrypted messages flash. I scan through Myra's updates. The transfer is complete. Every share, every cent safely in trust. I press a single key and the server locks. No breadcrumbs. No loose ends. I look in the mirror above my desk. For a second, I don't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she's unfamiliar, but because for the first time in years, she's free. I whisper to her, he has no idea who you are. But he will. Very soon. The house was quieter than usual. The kids were asleep, Ellie curled into her seafoam blanket with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, Leo sprawled diagonally across his bed like a starfish. I stood in the doorway of their room longer than I needed to, letting the stillness settle in my chest. This was the hardest part. Not the leaving, but the knowing that I had to. For them. For me. Back in the master bedroom, the air was stale with Grant's cologne, some designer brand he swore made him smell like influence. His duffel sat packed on the bench, tags peeking from his expensive linen shirts. I stared at it, momentarily tempted to slash through the fabric. But no, that wasn't my move. My victory wouldn't come in bursts of fury. It would come in silence. Precision. Intention. I moved through the walk-in closet without turning the light on. I already knew what I needed, my small travel bag tucked beneath a stack of yoga mats he'd always mocked me for never using. I pulled it out and laid it on the bed. One pair of jeans, a silk blouse, a tailored blazer, a cashmere wrap. Understated. Sharp. The kind of outfit that didn't beg for attention but couldn't be ignored. I packed the essentials next: charger, toiletries, the small velvet pouch containing my grandmother's necklace. She used to tell me, if you ever feel small, remember whose blood runs in your veins. I ran my thumb over the pendant before placing it in the side compartment. In the hidden drawer beneath the dresser, built into custom cabinetry Grant never noticed, I retrieved the folder. It held what he thought he destroyed: a valid passport, copies of the kids' birth certificates, and a safe deposit box key, along with a slim black envelope containing emergency cash and an unregistered debit card linked to an account he would never find. Everything Mira helped me set up a year ago, just in case. I double-checked the time. 2:17 a.m. The city outside slept beneath a blanket of amber streetlights. Grant wouldn't be up until at least 7, long after I was gone. I walked into the garage barefoot, each step a whisper on the cool floor. The vehicle I chose was tucked behind the Range Rover, an unassuming matte gray sedan that Grant always assumed belonged to a friend of mine who visited too often. He never looked at the plates, never questioned the keys I kept in the flower vase by the back door. I slid into the seat and started the engine. Silent, electric. Just like my exit. But first, the note. I walked back inside, not because I needed to, but because he deserved a farewell. I didn't want to scream or accuse. That would give him power. I wanted him to feel exactly what I'd felt for years: erased, underestimated, irrelevant. I grabbed a post-it from the fridge. Wrote in clean, steady handwriting, "You're right. I'll stay home. Enjoy your trip." I stuck it to his smoothie container for poetic symmetry, then left without looking back. By 3:15, I was checking into the penthouse suite at the Riverton Grand, a sleek column of glass and steel that towered above the city's skyline. I had been here before, under a different name, for meetings, consultations, once even a photo shoot for the press release we never published. The concierge greeted me like an old friend. I smiled, gave a fake name, then watched as my belongings were carried upstairs by a man with kind eyes and absolute discretion. The suite was everything Grant hated: bold, modern, with walls of windows that refused to hide. I set my bag down on the velvet chaise and walked to the balcony. The city stretched before me, pulsing with life, unaware and unbothered by the unraveling of one man's control. I took a deep breath and let the night air cut through me. Not cold. Cleansing. Inside, I powered up my laptop. Notifications poured in: deals, confirmations, security updates. Mira had already sent over the final verification. Everything was in motion. Everything I needed was mine. The strangest part was how calm I felt. Not vindicated. Not afraid. Just awake. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't reacting to Grant. I wasn't waiting for his moods, his approval, or his manipulation. I wasn't a fixture in someone else's life. I was a woman who'd quietly burned the blueprint he gave me and redrew it in her own ink. And now, I was free. The sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, draping everything in gold. I sat cross-legged on the sofa, coffee in one hand, Mira Quinn's voice in my ear. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Everything's frozen. Joint accounts, shared credit, investment portfolios. I've transferred all personal assets into the 3 trusts we discussed. Under the holding entity? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Yep, she confirmed. Ren Catalyst as planned. You now own everything outright through the corporate shell. Grant can't touch a cent. I leaned back into the cushions, feeling the warm weight of her words settle into my chest. It wasn't just about the money. It was about stripping Grant of the illusion of control he clung to so desperately. The moment he tried to make me small, to burn away my freedom, he unknowingly triggered every safeguard I'd spent years building. Mira and I had rehearsed this scenario over late-night calls and encrypted messages, never saying his name out loud, always referring to him as the variable. Now the variable had been isolated. I sipped my coffee slowly, the bitterness grounding me. On the screen in front of me, my bank dashboard refreshed, zeros across the board on the joint side. On my side? Comfortable, protected, untouchable. His cards. I asked. Should decline within the hour, Mira said crisply. Personal and business. The credit lines were tied to your FICO. He never noticed, did he? He never thought he needed to. She laughed softly. Men like Grant always forget the fine print. Or the woman who wrote it. I hung up after confirming the next steps. My eyes scanned the room, a symphony of sleek angles, chrome accents, and plush detail. It didn't feel like hiding. It felt like strategy. Power moves aren't always loud. Sometimes they're silent and clean, like a scalpel cutting through rot. I opened my email and scrolled past business correspondence until I found the notification I'd been waiting for, the surveillance footage. One of the cameras installed near the trash bin outside our house caught the full scene, Grant smirking as he lit the corner of my passport with a gold-plated lighter. Watching it again filled me with a strange calm. He'd been so smug, so sure of his victory. He didn't know that his match struck more than paper. It ignited every piece of resolve I had buried beneath years of placation. Now the fire was mine. I flagged the footage for Mira, who was preparing a legal case built on far more than financial negligence. Fraud, coercion, emotional and economic abuse. California courts didn't look kindly on that kind of evidence, especially when it involved dependents. And the kids, God, the kids. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting my breath move through the ache in my chest. This wasn't just about me. Grant and Rena had plotted to drain me dry, thinking I'd be too stunned to react, too domestic to fight back. But what they didn't factor in was the kind of rage a mother can channel when her children are part of the collateral. I would never let them become pawns in Grant's games. Across the room, my second phone lit up. I reached for it. It was the secure line Mira and I used for sensitive matters. A new message had arrived from the private investigator I'd hired last month. It was a full dossier on Grant's movements over the past 6 weeks and, more interestingly, Rena's. There were receipts, hotel bookings, voice recordings, timestamps that painted a clear picture of deceit. They thought they'd won. They thought I was buried. But this was lockdown mode, and I wasn't the one locked out. I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the pulse of Riverton City. From here, the world looked both massive and manageable. I could see the path unfolding beneath me, one step at a time. No more pretending. No more waiting for things to fix themselves. This wasn't damage control. It was the start of something sharper, cleaner, and entirely mine. Grant would step off the plane in Isla Terra thinking the world was still at his feet. By the time he realized it wasn't, I'd already be 10 moves ahead. Let them believe they've won. The real game had just begun. The message to Damon was simple: we should talk. You deserve the truth. I hadn't seen Rena's fiancé since Grant's last birthday party, the one where she wore that blood-red dress and toasted to loyalty and ambition. She kissed Damon in front of the guests that night, all affection and pretense, while sneaking glances at Grant every chance she got. I saw it all, tucked behind my careful hostess smile. I always saw more than they realized. Damon responded within minutes. Where and when? We met in a quiet cafe tucked between a bookstore and a florist, neutral ground, public enough to be safe, private enough for secrets. He looked tired, like a man who hadn't slept well in months. His jaw was tight, his shirt rumpled, and he didn't bother with small talk. I know something's off, he said before I even sat down. I've known. Just didn't want to believe it. I slid a thin folder across the table, watching his fingers hover over it like he already sensed what was inside. Photos. Screenshots. Hotel receipts. Grant and Rena, caught in their carefully curated lies. You needed to see it from someone who wasn't trying to protect you, I said softly. He didn't say anything at first. Just flipped through the pages, slower than I expected. His throat worked as he swallowed hard. She used to talk about you like you were clueless. Like you were just some background character. I gave a quiet laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. That's how Grant sees me too. They deserve each other. He looked up then, his eyes sharp, finally meeting mine. "What do you want from me?" "Access," I said simply. "Her passwords, devices, cloud storage, anything she's careless with." He studied me for a long moment. "And what's in it for me?" "Truth," I said. "And revenge, if you want it." That's what convinced him. Not anger, not justice. Just the raw clarity of being betrayed by someone you gave everything to. He pulled out his phone and began typing. 5 minutes later, I had a list of logins, plus the backup passcode she'd used when she locked herself out of her iCloud account. "She's reckless," he muttered. "Always thought she was smarter than everyone else." "Good," I replied. "That'll make this easier." Later that night, I sat cross-legged on the floor of the penthouse with my laptop glowing in front of me and a hard drive humming beside it. I logged into Rena's cloud storage and paused only once, fingers hovering over the keys. This was the line. The one I wouldn't cross unless I was ready to fully commit to the fallout. I crossed it, and what I found inside made my chest tighten with a mixture of fury and cold satisfaction. Screenshots of bank plans, Grant and Rena's post-Leona life folder. Voice memos between them, whispering about transferring assets to offshore accounts. One clip of Rena's voice, laughing. "She'll fold like paper when the money's gone. Just smile at her, and she'll think everything's fine." A file labeled Exit Strategy detailed how they planned to pin their financial withdrawal on a bookkeeping error. Rena had even drafted a fake apology from the accounting firm, time-stamped and ready to forward. They were meticulous in their betrayal, right down to the scripts they'd written for me. "You'll play the hurt but understanding wife," one email read. "Take the sympathy route. She'll cry on a podcast in 6 months." My fingers curled into fists. They didn't just want to leave me. They wanted to break me, brand me as the broken one, paint themselves as reborn lovers free from the burden of an insecure, hysterical housewife. Except I wasn't broken. I was watching them dig their own graves. I forwarded the files to Mira immediately, labeling them for evidence submission. Then I backed everything up twice. One on an encrypted drive, the other in a dead-drop server Mira had set up during the earliest phases of my escape plan. I sat back, heart racing, as the city lights blinked through the windows behind me. Everything was falling into place. Damon sent me one more message before I logged off for the night. "She's heading to Isla Terra tomorrow. He thinks it'll be smooth. Thought you should know." Perfect. Let them toast under the Mediterranean sun. Let them feel untouchable. They were about to learn what it feels like to be hunted by someone they thought was prey. The monitor flickered to life as I pulled up the archived footage. Each second loaded with that tense, clinical crispness of security cameras, no sound, no drama, just cold, indisputable truth. One clip, in particular, made me lean forward, breath held. Grant, in our backyard, lighter in hand, standing over the trash bin like he was some twisted magician performing a vanishing act. The flames danced up the corner of my passport, the plastic crackling as it melted. He laughed. I could see it, his head tilted back, eyes squinting with glee, mouth wide. That smug, theatrical laugh he usually reserved for sales victories and cruel jokes. I watched it twice. Not because I doubted what I'd seen, but because I wanted to burn it into my mind the same way he'd tried to burn my identity. This wasn't carelessness. This was control, punishment, and arrogance all wrapped into one flame. He hadn't just wanted to stop me from leaving, he wanted to make it permanent. To reduce me to the version of myself he thought I was, dependent, stuck, powerless. But I wasn't powerless. I uploaded the video to the evidence archive Mira was assembling. It joined the files from Rena's cloud, screenshots of wire transfer plans, emails dripping with contempt, and journal entries they probably thought were clever, like teenagers high on secrecy. I stared at the folder as it grew, each piece of data another blade in my arsenal. This wasn't just ammunition. It was armor. Proof that this wasn't a simple case of marital breakdown. This was premeditated manipulation. A performance carefully crafted by two people who believed I would stay too silent, too loyal, too numb to notice. They were wrong. Mira had already begun prepping the legal filings. Fraud. Financial abuse. Custody reallocation based on endangerment and negligence. She moved fast, faster than I thought possible. We'd known this day was coming, but even she seemed energized by the scope of it. They didn't just screw with your finances, she said on our call earlier that morning. They staged a coordinated effort to dismantle your autonomy. That's a case judges don't like to ignore. I watched the footage again, this time noting the date stamp, the angle of the shadows, the satisfied way Grant adjusted his collar after tossing the lighter back into his pocket. He didn't even check to see if the flames died out properly. Just turned and walked away, like it was finished. Like I was finished. I emailed Mira the final log and closed the files, fingers trembling only slightly. Not with fear, but with control. I'd never been more composed. This wasn't revenge for pain. This was defense. This was justice. Then I opened the box. It had been sitting in the corner of the suite, untouched since I checked in. I pulled the lid off slowly, reverently. Inside were the copies of court-prepared affidavits Mira had overnight. Grant's name etched beside mine. Custody filings. Asset freezes. Cease and desist letters addressed to Rena's firm, ready to be served with evidence attached. The power of real legal pressure sat right there in 12 paper-thin pages. I reached for the pen. There was no flourish, no ceremony. Just a simple, precise stroke. My signature slid across the bottom lines with clean finality. A new chapter, backed by law, backed by truth, backed by every inch of pain and planning that had brought me to this moment. When the documents were back in their folder, I closed the box, sealing everything I'd once feared I might never be brave enough to do. I stood, walked to the massive windows, and looked out over the city. The horizon stretched wide, glass towers catching the sun like beacons. Somewhere, Grant was boarding a plane with Rena, full of plans and champagne and the delusion that I was still waiting in our sterile kitchen, wondering when he'd call. But I wasn't waiting. I was preparing. And now I was armed. The first alert came through while Grant was probably sipping something stupidly overpriced on a sun-drenched patio. Transaction declined. Crescent black card. Hotel Grand Vista. I stared at the screen, expressionless, letting the silence hang in the room. One by one, the alerts followed. Restaurants. Airport lounges. His business account. Rena's nail salon appointment. The system flagged them all, each notification a gentle chime of justice. I imagined the moment he realized it, maybe after handing his card to a waiter in that smug, casual way he always did, expecting the world to bend around his expense. Maybe he'd chuckle at first, think it was a fluke, a tech hiccup. But with every declined attempt, the illusion would crack. The mansion was next. He hadn't known I changed the codes the same night I left. Myra's team had it done within hours. Grant still thought the house was his fortress, the throne room of his domain. But now? It was mine, locked, sealed, and fitted with a new security system synced to my phone. The new codes were random combinations of letters and numbers with no emotional ties, nothing he could guess. Not our wedding date. Not the kids' birthdays. Not even his precious golf handicap. The footage came in around midnight. Grant, jet-lagged and frantic, stumbling up to the door with his phone pressed to his ear, probably trying to reach me, unaware his number was blocked. He punched in the old code 3 times, his frustration building with each attempt. Then he tried to shoulder the door open. The camera caught everything, his wild gestures, the cursing, the panicked slaps at the touchscreen panel. Then the lights came on inside. Motion sensors. He jumped like a startled dog. The final image? Him screaming into the night while holding his dead phone in one hand. A perfect portrait of collapse. Mira forwarded the footage to our case file, already neatly categorized under unlawful entry attempt. That was the language she used. Precise. Professional. Lethal in court. The next morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Leona. His voice was sharp, tight. What the hell is going on? I didn't respond right away. Let the silence stretch. My cards aren't working, he snapped. The house won't let me in. What did you do? I swirled the coffee in my cup. I took care of what's mine. There was a pause. Look, I don't know what kind of tantrum this is. I laughed, sharp and unbothered. Tantrum? Grant, this isn't a tantrum. This is a transition. You froze everything? Without talking to me. You lit my passport on fire, I said calmly. Did you want to schedule a meeting about that too? Silence again. Longer this time. This is overboard, Leona. You're acting insane. No, I said. I'm acting informed. And legally protected. You'll be hearing from Mira soon. You can't just shut me out. But I can, I said. And I have. He hung up. I stared at the phone for a moment longer, then turned back to the windows. The city was humming with its usual rhythm, unbothered by Grant's unraveling. And me? I wasn't flinching anymore. I wasn't scared of his anger, his threats, or his desperate calls. He'd crossed a line the second he tried to turn me into collateral. He made a choice to gamble everything on the assumption I was too weak to play. Now he was watching the consequences in real time. He'd lost his access. He'd lost his leverage. And he was about to lose a whole lot more. It didn't take long for the media to pounce. The moment Reese Devlin's article went live, the story exploded. Digital Dreamwives and the Price of Control, a title as sharp as it was haunting. I had sent her everything she needed, the footage, the documents, the emails, even the voice memos of Rena and Grant laughing about my so-called suburban meltdown. Reese was more than a journalist. She was an old friend, someone who'd seen me before the marriage, before the money, before I shrank myself into a mold someone else designed. The article painted the truth with surgical precision. A celebrated tech visionary hidden behind the veil of domesticity. A marriage built on manipulation. A husband who burned a passport to trap his wife while he fled to a Mediterranean island with his mistress. Reese had a gift for tone. Her words didn't scream. They simmered, they pricked, they left wounds wide open. By the third paragraph, Grant's empire began to crack. The article went viral within an hour. I watched it unfold from the penthouse, notifications flooding my phone. Shares, retweets, angry comment threads. People weren't just reading, they were devouring it. Women, in particular, filled the digital space with fury and solidarity. I was Leona, one comment read. But I didn't have the resources. She fought back for all of us. Influencers picked it up. Podcasters dissected it. Panels debated it. And Grant? He couldn't scroll fast enough to outrun the backlash. I imagined him in some sterile hotel room in Isla Terra, Wi-Fi barely holding, watching his name trend for all the wrong reasons. Not as a visionary. Not as a charismatic founder. But as a manipulator, a thief, a man who lit fire to his wife's passport and tried to sell a betrayal as self-care. The footage embedded in the article made it impossible for him to deny. There he was, crystal clear, striking the lighter, smirking as he flicked it to life. Reese ended the article with a quote from me, though she didn't name me directly. The fire wasn't the end. It was the beginning. He tried to erase me. Instead, he helped me see myself more clearly than ever. It was the only thing I gave her directly. And it was enough. By that evening, Grant's followers had turned on him. The carefully curated illusion of our power couple, life dissolved under scrutiny. People dug into our past, interviews, appearances, the speeches he gave while I stood quietly in the background. Suddenly, those old photos looked different. People saw it now, the way I stood a step behind, how he interrupted me mid-sentence during panels, how I was always introduced last, if at all. Commentators tore into his business. Investors panicked. Someone leaked that Rena had been listed as a consultant, drawing a six-figure salary, despite having no tech background. The house of cards he built on borrowed charm and boardroom theatrics was trembling. I watched it all from the penthouse with eerie calm. Not gleeful, not vengeful, just still. Like the eye of a storm I no longer feared. I didn't need to yell or wave my arms. The truth did the heavy lifting. Reese texted me, "You good?" I replied, "Better than I've ever been." For the first time in years, I wasn't the one defending myself. I wasn't explaining or justifying or smoothing over the cracks in someone else's narrative. The world finally saw what I had lived through, and they believed me. The irony was rich. Grant always wanted attention. He wanted headlines and applause. Now he had them, just not in the way he imagined. I shut off the notifications after a while. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need validation anymore. I didn't need the world to say, "You were right." I already knew I was. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my name, my voice, my story, and the next chapter would be mine to write. The foundation launch was quiet, intentionally so. I didn't want spectacle. I wanted purpose. I named it the Evelyn Wren Foundation after my mother, who used to tell me, being smart isn't enough, they have to see you. She meant the world would miss women like us unless we made ourselves undeniable. She never got to see the life I built, but her voice was stitched into every line of the Foundation's charter. Accessible science education for girls, mentorships, funding for programs in underfunded communities, and scholarships for young women with nowhere else to turn. We launched with a seed fund of $10 million, all my own money. I didn't want sponsors. I wanted independence, control, integrity. The way Grant had spoken about philanthropy always made my skin crawl, how he saw it as a PR angle, a branding strategy, a photo op. I wasn't interested in performative charity. I wanted something real, something that lasted. And this was mine. The first call I made after the launch wasn't to a journalist or a board member. It was to Ezra. He answered on the second ring. "Leo?" His voice was hesitant, softer than I remembered. "Is that really you?" "It's me," I said, blinking back tears I hadn't expected. "I know it's been a while." There was a pause, a breath, and then, "You don't owe me an apology." But I gave him one anyway. He was the only family I had left, and I'd pushed him away the second Grant started making comments about his lack of ambition, about how Ezra's work in environmental advocacy was noble, but not scalable. Grant didn't like Ezra because Ezra didn't perform for him, didn't shrink in his presence or offer fake respect. And I let the space widen between us because keeping peace with my husband felt more urgent than protecting the bond with my brother. I read the article. Ezra said gently, "I'm proud of you. And I'm so damn sorry for everything." We talked for hours. About Mom. About how much I missed her. About what I was building now and how I wished she could see it. He asked about the kids. I asked about his latest project, some sustainable aquifer program in South Asia. We promised to see each other soon. And this time, I meant it. Later that evening, I called Koa. Grant had hated her. Said she was too loud, too much, too opinionated. Which really meant she saw right through him. Koa was the kind of friend who didn't sugarcoat things. She once told me, "He talks to you like you're furniture," and I laughed it off, even though it sliced me clean. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, another silent casualty of my old life. She picked up on the first ring. Holy hell, look who remembered my number. I smiled for real this time. "Hey, stranger." "I should be mad at you," she said, but her voice was warm. "But I saw the article." I cried. Then I screamed. Then I poured a glass of wine and said, "That's my girl." We stayed on the phone until the battery drained. I told her everything. No filters, no pretenses. She listened. Interrupted with outrage, cracked jokes when I needed them, and swore she was flying in the next weekend. "You're not rebuilding this alone," she told me. Not this time. The kids were adjusting. Slowly, curiously. Ellie asked when Daddy was coming back, and I didn't lie. I just told her he wouldn't be living with us anymore, but that she was loved and safe and none of it was her fault. Leo was quiet, but I could see the questions turning behind his eyes. I didn't push. I let them come to me when they were ready. We cooked together that night, spaghetti and garlic bread, messy and joyful. I let them stay up late watching a nature documentary. As they fell asleep on the couch, I looked around the suite, not as a hiding place anymore, but a haven. A beginning. I wasn't chasing vindication now. I was anchoring into something deeper, stability, clarity, legacy. This wasn't about escaping what had been. It was about choosing what came next. I picked the cafe myself, bright, busy, and loud enough to swallow any tension. There was a safety in noise, in clinking glasses and low conversation, in the casual bustle of people just living their lives. Grant had asked for a meeting, and for once, I agreed. Not because I wanted closure. I'd already found mine. But because he needed to see what I looked like now, undiminished, unafraid, and wholly uninterested in the man he used to be. He arrived 10 minutes late, of course. Still dressed like power was stitched into his collar, tailored blazer, polished shoes, the same smug expression that used to make my stomach twist. But something was off this time. His eyes darted too quickly, his jaw clenched too tight. The public scrutiny was starting to wear on him. "Leona," he said, sliding into the chair across from me like nothing had happened. "You look different." I smiled lightly. "Freedom suits me." He didn't laugh. He looked down at the coffee menu like he might find answers in the foam options. "I thought we could talk. Set things straight." I leaned back. "Go ahead." For a moment, he floundered. His confidence cracked. I watched him sift through tactics, soft eyes, regretful tone, a hand reaching halfway across the table before pulling back. "I know I made mistakes," he said finally. "I let things get out of control. But this is overkill." That old tone again. The one that turned apologies into accusations. "I didn't set your passport on fire because I wanted to hurt you," he added quickly. "I was trying to stop you from doing something rash. You've always been a little impulsive." I tilted my head. Impulsive? I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Neatly tabbed, each document a nail in the coffin he'd built himself. I slid it across the table. "Here's the prenup. Here's the evidence. And here's what you walk away with." He didn't touch it. "I'm offering you a clean exit," I said, voice steady. "No drawn-out court battle. No more public humiliation. You walk away with what you came into the marriage with. That's it." His face twisted. "You think you can just erase me?" "You erased yourself," I said. "I just made it official." He leaned in, lower now, quieter. "You wouldn't even have PRYSM without me. Who do you think paid for those early prototypes? Who kept the lights on while you played scientist in the guest room?" I laughed, sharp and cold. "Grant, you didn't keep the lights on. You didn't even notice they were on. And as for PRYSM? Every line of code, every pitch, every sleepless night, that was mine. You were too busy posting inspirational quotes and sleeping with Rena." He went silent. I could see the tantrum forming behind his eyes, the one he used to unleash when things didn't go his way. But here, in this cafe, with people laughing 3 tables over and waiters weaving between seats, there was no room for his rage. No private walls to punch. No version of me that still flinched. "You think this makes you strong?" he said finally. "Tearing apart our family?" "No," I said, standing up, calm and final. "I think it makes me free." I left the folder on the table, untouched. His face was pale, pinched, the corners of his mouth twitching like he wanted to shout. But he didn't. He couldn't. And I didn't look back. Outside, the air felt lighter. I inhaled deeply, letting it fill every inch of the space he used to occupy inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't even satisfied in the way I thought I'd be. I was simply done. And that was enough. The morning sun broke through the clouds as I stood outside the botanical gardens, holding Ellie's hand while Leo tugged impatiently at my other side. "Are we going to see the butterflies again?" Ellie asked, eyes wide with hope. "Yes," I smiled. "And the koi pond." The gates opened, and we stepped into color, lush greens, bursts of floral reds and yellows, the air rich with the scent of jasmine and soil. It had been too long since I did something that didn't serve anyone but us. No networking, no forced smiles at charity galas, no pretending for Grant's benefit. Just a mother and her children walking through beauty. We wandered slowly, the kids running ahead and circling back like satellites around me. At the pond, Ellie tossed in bits of the approved feed, watching the koi swarm and shimmer like liquid jewels. Leo pointed out a turtle sunning itself on a rock. I let myself be still, soaking in the ease of their laughter. No tension. No veiled insults. Just the way I'd always wanted it to feel. Later, as we sat on a bench beneath the arbor, I pulled out my notebook, an old habit from before everything, back when I still scribbled ideas in the margins of my days. But this time, I wasn't plotting escape or calculating risk. I was building something. Finalizing the framework for PRYSM. It had taken shape slowly over the years, but now it was real. A digital space rooted in truth, designed to dismantle the performative noise of traditional social platforms. No filters masking reality, no algorithms pushing envy and insecurity. PRYSM would be a sanctuary for transparency, designed with intention, ethics, and inclusion from the ground up. I'd already assembled a team, engineers, designers, behavioral scientists, people who had seen the toxicity of current platforms and wanted more. And now, I was ready to take it public. Not for headlines or investor glory, but because I believed in it. Because after being erased in my own home for years, I wanted to build something that made people feel seen. As the kids dozed in the back seat on the drive home, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked different. Not younger, not necessarily happier, but clearer. There was no more static in my mind, no voice second-guessing whether I was enough, or too much, or too inconvenient. I wasn't navigating around someone else's ego anymore. I was steering my own life. Back at the penthouse, I tucked the kids into bed, kissed their foreheads, and sat at my desk. The blueprint for PRYSM's launch site glowed softly on my laptop. I pulled up my final checklist, ticking off items one by one. Investor outreach done. Equity structuring secured. Patent protection filed. Everything was aligned. Tomorrow, I would book the trip to Valencia. Valencia. The city I dreamed about since I was 21. Whitestone streets, rooftops like coral waves, food that tasted like summer, and history in every breath. Grant used to mock it when I brought it up. Called it a fantasy trip for people with too much time and not enough strategy. But it wasn't a fantasy. It was a symbol. Of all the things I shelved to make him comfortable. Of all the dreams I postponed while he built his empire. Now I was going. I didn't need permission. I didn't need to explain. I opened the browser and booked 3 flights. 1 adult. 2 children. First class. As the confirmation hit my inbox, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Not a sigh of relief. More like the quiet peace of reclaiming something that had always been mine. I wasn't rebuilding from pieces anymore. I was creating something entirely new. And for the first time in years, every step was mine to choose. The auditorium in Marwin pulsed with energy, a subtle undercurrent that hummed beneath the polished stage lights and sleek digital banners flashing PRYSM, reclaiming reality. I stood backstage, the click of my heels muffled by the thick carpeting, one hand gripping the small note card I didn't need. The speech was already burned into my mind, not because I rehearsed it, but because it lived inside me. It was my story, and now it was my platform. When they called my name, I stepped out to a sea of expectant faces, industry leaders, creators, students, reporters. People looking for something real in a world overrun with curated fiction. I paused just a beat before beginning. Not out of nerves. Out of gratitude. For the space. For the survival. For the fact that I was here at all. My name is Leona Wren, I said. And for years, I lived a double life. The silence was immediate. Electric. By day, I was the wife of a successful entrepreneur. A mother. A woman whose name was often left off the invitations. By night, I was building something quietly, deliberately. Not for applause, but for truth. I walked them through PRYSM, how it worked, why it existed, what it was meant to disrupt. But woven through the technical specs and visionary language was the marrow of it all, authenticity. A space not built for likes or followers, but for connection. One that stripped away the masks so many of us felt forced to wear. When I stepped off stage, the applause was immediate and sustained. People rose to their feet, not because I asked them to, but because something in them recognized what I had spoken. Not just innovation. Liberation. Back in the green room, I let myself breathe. The weight of the moment settled over me like warm light. Then a knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Sorry, came a voice. You left your notes. He stepped in holding the card I'd barely used, wearing dark jeans, a button-down with the sleeves rolled, and an easy smile that didn't ask anything of me. Nico. We'd met earlier in the conference during a panel on ethical design. He'd spoken with conviction, not ego. A social entrepreneur who built solar tech for rural communities. His presence had been a quiet bomb in a room full of egos shouting to be heard. "Thanks," I said, taking the card. "You didn't need it," he said, nodding toward the stage. "You already had the room." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't pretense. It was something else. A shared knowing. A gentle kind of curiosity. We talked for a while about our work, our philosophies, the mess and beauty of rebuilding from ruin. There was no pitch. No prelude to anything. Just presence. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Later, after the summit wound down, I found myself on the balcony of my suite. The Marwin skyline stretched before me, silver and endless. The air was cool and alive with possibility. I stood there barefoot, wrapped in a robe, the city's pulse steady beneath me. Behind me, the room was still. My phone was quiet. The kids were safe, sleeping peacefully back home with Ezra and Koa staying over like the village I'd never had before. And me? I wasn't thinking about Grant. Not anymore. He tried to burn my wings. But he only lit the fire that helped me fly. Every piece of me he tried to dismantle had been reforged stronger, sharper, truer. I didn't just reclaim my life. I rebuilt it. From the ashes, yes, but with vision. With clarity. With grace. And now, standing above the city in this new light, I saw the future. And it was mine,